Are you ready to have children? I've created a questionnaire for people considering this, and I've divided it into 6 categories. So here goes. The first category is the nature of your relationship or partnership. And the first question in this category is, do you love and respect your partner? Loving and respecting one's partner means having a bond with someone else that presents for the child a model of how people get along with each other, how people relate. And when people love and respect their partner, they're happier, they're more stable, they're more able to give to other people, they're less needy, they're able to be more caring to other people, and they also create what is the basics of a home, the basics of a nurturing environment to bring a child into. They bring the child into a world of love and respect when they love their partner. So the second question, does your partner love and respect you? So it's not just do you love and respect them, but does it also come back to you? Meaning, are you in a relationship of mutual love, of equality? And I think this is really important because I think a lot of people actually love and respect their partner, but they don't necessarily get it in return. So it really is important that it goes both ways because, again, this shows a child a world of mutuality between their parents. So, next question. To what degree is your partner your best friend? Well, I think this is an ideal for a lot of people because to be parents together, you really have to be partners. And to really be partners on such an important, intimate venture, I think it would be really important to do it with your best friend, not do it with someone who's sort of not really much of a friend at all. And I think a lot of parents end up doing this. They end up having a business relationship and trying to raise their kids together, even though maybe they don't even like each other all that much. So I think it's really, really important that we really do like each other. We really do like our partners, because when people don't like each other that much, the kids pick it up, and the kids get raised in an environment where there's all sorts of unpleasant subliminal stuff, or sometimes not so subliminal stuff going on that really doesn't nurture them that well, that doesn't nurture their growth process. So next question, how do you and your partner resolve conflict? This tells a lot about how people relate to each other. Do people scream and fight? Do they give each other the silent treatment? Do they manipulate each other? Do they emotionally sabotage each other, harm each other? Or when there is a conflict, because inevitably there are conflicts in relationships, inevitably parents have conflicts with each other. Do people resolve their conflicts in a healthy way? Do they talk it out? Do they really actually try to listen to each other? Do they try to understand the other person's point of view? Do they try to acknowledge what's healthy in the other person's point of view? During conflict, is a person able to listen to their own arguments and see potential flaws in them? Consider the possibility that they may not be quite right. Can they consider the possibility that they might be partially right and partially wrong? Or the possibility that their partner can be partially right and partially wrong? And I think it's also important, really important, to have a partner who's doing the same thing simultaneously. Otherwise, it can end up with a real imbalance in the relationship where one person ends up giving in all the time and the other person ends up winning conflicts all the time. And this is no way to resolve a conflict. So, next question. Do you think your partner would be a good parent? The hope, of course, is that you're going to have a partner who you think would be a great parent, who would be an excellent parent, would be the kind of person that you wish you had as a parent, and that you yourself could be the kind of person that you wish you had as a parent. And I think, yeah, a lot of people, they have partners that they don't really think would be great parents. They maybe think they would be a great parent, but they think, well, you know, my partner has other skills that they're going to bring to this relationship. But I think for the sake of the child, at minimum, I think it's going to take 2 people really giving themselves to it, 2 people who are really talented and good at it. So, next question. Do you like your partner's friends? Well, this tells a lot. Because when we really like our partner's friends, it really says a lot how we really feel about our partner's character. And also you could ask, does your partner like your friends? Because ideally, yeah, you're going to really like your partner's friends a lot because they're going to be a reflection of your partner. And your partner is going to really like your friends a lot because your friends are going to be a reflection of you. So it really would be natural in the ideal healthy sense for the sake of the child to have people who really like their partner's friends and their partner likes their friends. And if you don't like your partner's friends, can bring up a lot of questions about, well, who actually is your partner and how do you really feel about your partner and what are your partner's values? And the same thing, if your partner really doesn't like your friends, well, what does that say about your friends? What does that say about you? And what does that say about your partner? So these are really important questions. Last question in the first category. Are you having affairs? Or do you want to? That is, do you want to have romantic or sexual relationships outside of your primary relationship? To me, this is a really bad one. If you do want to have affairs, you do want to have sex with people outside of your romantic relationship, then it's probably not a very good idea to have children with this person, because that means you're leaking your energy. Your energy is going elsewhere. You're looking for somebody else to meet some basic emotional needs, which in some ways your partner could be meeting, and in some ways you should probably be meeting for yourself. So if you can't meet them yourself, your partner's not meeting them, and you're looking outside your relationship to get them, it's usually a pretty bad sign for having children for a lot of different reasons. One reason is that, well, you're leaking a lot of emotional energy, so probably when you do have a child, you'll be leaking a lot of that emotional energy into your relationship with your child. Secondly, also, when people are having affairs, it often does not spell a good future for their relationship with their partner. So if you can't stay committed to your partner, this is going to be devastating at some level to your child, because you may end up splitting up with your partner, and that's horrible for a child. Even though some children say, yeah, it was so much better when my parents split up. That in itself is a sign that the relationship was so terrible when the parents split up, it was even better. Whew, disaster. So, second category, your emotional healthiness. First question, how well do you know yourself? The hope is that when someone has a child, they know themselves really, really well. That means they know what they're getting into. It also means they are presenting their child with a parent who is really self-aware. And when you know yourself really well, you make a lot fewer mistakes. You do a lot fewer things that are really acting out. And also, it means you've really had a chance to work out a lot of the kinks in your personality, the problems, the things in you that are screwed up, because you really know what they are. You've really studied yourself. So I think it's really important to know oneself. And I think a lot of people who go into the process of having children go in very, very self-unaware. They really don't know themselves that well. And what they end up with is they end up with a child and a relationship with this child that can be very, very messy, because they did not know what they were getting into. They didn't even know who they were going into the relationship. And here they're in a relationship with a whole new being who's looking up to them to learn about the basic models of what it's like to be in a relationship with another human. And yet they're in a relationship with someone who doesn't even know themselves. So, really important to know oneself. Next question. Are you needy or lonely? Needy, meaning do you have unresolved emotional needs that you're looking for other people to meet? Well, when people get into a relationship with their child and they are needy, they're going at some level to expect that child to meet their needs. And the horrible thing is, children, by very nature of their dependence and their powerlessness, can't help but try to meet the needs of their parents. And this is emotionally devastating for a child, because that's not what children were born to do. Children were born full of needs, and they were born with a need for their parents to be there for them, to meet those needs. And when parents are needy, they turn that dynamic around, and they end up wanting the child to give to them, as opposed to giving to the child. And this really, really messes children up. It's one of the primary ways that children get screwed up. And there's all sorts of unresolved needs that parents have that can really warp a child's personality. All sorts of unresolved emotional love needs from childhood, sexual needs, friendship needs, boundary needs. Now, another part is loneliness. This is very connected to neediness, because when parents are lonely, it means they're missing something inside of themselves. They're missing something in their relationship with themselves and in their relationship with other people. And they can't help but try to have their child patch up their loneliness. And it actually is rather amazing how many prospective parents are lonely and have children just for the purpose of meeting their loneliness. They're lonely, they're bored, they don't have something very fulfilling going on in their life, and they're hoping that child will plug that up. And woo, again, really, really unfair to a child, because children are not born to do that. They're not meant to do that, and it really warps them when it happens. So ideally, you get a parent who, before they're ready to have children, who is not needy, who feels their emotional needs are met. And so when they're giving to their child, they're giving from a surplus. Also, they're not lonely. So this child is coming into the world not having to try to meet the parent's loneliness needs. Instead, the child is coming into a world of a satisfied, happy, secure parent. And so the child is coming into an environment where they can focus on themselves, which is exactly what little children need to do in order to grow in a healthy way. Next question. Do you sleep well? The reason I ask, do you sleep well, is the ability to consistently get a good night's sleep is one of the basic underpinnings of good emotional health. When people sleep well, they're able to dream well, they're able to resolve a lot of their daily conflicts, they're able to get centered again, and they're able to start each new day fresh with energy and focus and a sense of who they are. When people don't sleep well, they get into all sorts of problems. Their emotions get all thrown off, they're thrown off their center, they don't have the same level of focus, their patience is very low, and all these things can be very troubling in the relationship with a child. Now add to it one other factor, that very often when parents have a child, especially a baby, babies often don't sleep very well. And this can really, really trouble a parent's ability to sleep well. So if parents before they have children already aren't sleeping well, things often get a lot worse. Next question. Do you have unresolved traumas? Meaning, do you have unresolved conflicts that are split off in your personality? Are you partially dissociated? Do you have things buried inside of you that are really painful, unresolved conflicts going back in your life? The problem is, when people have unresolved traumas inside of them, they act this out in their relationship with their child. This is the transgenerational transmission of trauma. People with unresolved traumas from their own life, often from their own parents, or from even beyond that, maybe from their grandparents, passed to their parents, then passed to them, they pass this on to their children. Of course, they don't want to pass this on to their children, but it's an unconscious process. When people have unresolved traumas, they live in the unconscious. And the unconscious has a very, very powerful effect on people's relationship with their children. So in the ideal sense, people would want to resolve their unresolved traumas. And once people start to resolve their unresolved traumas, they know that they're in this process. They know that they're doing this. And often there's different ways to get clues about how much unresolved trauma they still have. They can look at their dreams. They can look at ways to see how dissociated they are. They can see how they interact with other people in intimate relationships. Because a lot of unresolved traumatic stuff does come up in intimate relationships. People can see how they relate to their partner. They can how they relate in romance, how they relate in sex, how they relate in intimate friendships, how they relate when they're under a lot of pressure in their life. These are all ways to gauge how traumatized a person is. And people can gauge this from themselves. And ideally, when they have kids, they want to at least resolve a lot of their traumas, ideally most or all of their traumas, and if they haven't, at least to know that they have the tools to be able to resolve their traumas. The other thing, though, that's really hard is that once people do have children, it becomes a lot harder to resolve their traumas because they have less time, they have less energy because they have a dependent, they have somebody that they have to be responsible to. So it's very, very hard to do this after people have kids. It's hard to do it before people have kids, but it's harder afterwards. So I think this is a really key question for people. Next, how well are you in touch with the emotional realities of your childhood? Well, what's interesting is, and this kind of surprises me, but a lot of people really have split off their childhood, they don't remember it. They don't think about it, or they remember very, very little of it. Or maybe they remember details of their childhood, but they don't remember the emotional realities of it. Well, ideally, before people have children, it's definitely best to really know one's own childhood well. Because guess what? If you're going to be dealing with someone else's childhood and you're going to be providing the predominant environment that that child is going to live in, your emotional relationship with that child, you're going to want to know your own childhood, because one's own childhood has a profound effect on how one raises one's child. One's relationship with one's parents, that's where you learn how to raise your kids. And also, this goes back again to healing one's own trauma, because when you start healing your own traumas, you become a parent for yourself in a different way. And the more you've worked to resolve your traumas and learned how to do this yourself, by doing this process, you learn how to parent yourself, and you can change the way that you parent your child. You can be a more nurturing, healing, healthy parent. So again, this does come down to knowing your own childhood, because when people don't know their childhood at all, often what they're doing when they have children is they raise them on autopilot, and the autopilot is to repeat what you've learned in your childhood. So if you haven't really resolved that, unfortunately, people end up replicating a lot of the messed up things that happened to them when they were children. Third category, and this is a shorter one, your physical health. Well, first question I have under this category is, how old are you? What's a really healthy, appropriate age for people to have children? I think in some ways it's a lot better if people are younger, because they have more energy, they're more active, their mind is better, they're more open, they're more curious, often they're more excited about life. These are all great things to have as a parent. The problem is if people are too young, then they're not emotionally stable enough. They haven't reached enough maturity to really know who they are. They haven't developed enough of an adult relationship with the outside world. And in many ways, when people are younger, even younger adults, they're still children in a lot of ways. And I don't think it's such a good idea when children have children. It's better when adults have children. On the other side, too old. Well, in some ways, older parents have a lot of advantages. They can give a lot more to their child in terms of knowledge, wisdom, maturity, life experience, all things that are really valuable for a parent to give to a child. But as people are older, their bodies aren't in such good shape, they start to break down, they're not as active, maybe they can't play as much, they don't have as much energy. The other problem is, when people get older, there's more likelihood that they're going to die. So this brings me to one of the other questions. How do you project your health to be in 20 years? This is why it's scary when you see people who are having children when they're 50 years old or 60 years old, or sometimes you see these guys having kids at 70 years old, and it's like they're probably not going to be alive in 20 years, meaning their child is going to be 20 years old, not necessarily even fully beginning adult life yet, and they don't even have a parent. This is a real setup for abandonment, for devastation. It's a terrible, terrible thing when children lose a parent to death when the child is young. I remember reading one time that the number one predictor of the diagnosis of major depression in adults is the loss of one or more parents before the age of 11. So ideally, a parent would want to be really confident that they're going to live quite a long time into their child's life. Another one, are you in good physical shape and do you have a lot of energy? Because it takes a huge amount of energy to raise children. It's like you want to be in great shape. You want to be able to do all the things that children can do. You want to be able to play with them for hours and hours and hours and go on long hikes and walk and play sports with them and have all sorts of things going on, especially as they get older. Another question, the last question in the category of your physical health, how are your genes? What are your genetics? I think it's really important for people to know what their genetics are, because people often pass on a lot of unpleasant things to their children. And I think it's really nice to know that you have a healthy set of genes, that you're going to pass on good, healthy things to your kids. You're not going to give your kids a genetic disease that's going to mess them up. Also, this is another problem. As parents get older, they're more likely to pass genetic problems on to their children. So again, another good reason to be younger for men and for women before they have children. Fourth category, your rapport with children. So my first question, to what degree have you spent time around children? It's kind of shocking to me how many people have children but actually have spent very, very little time around children, meaning they're getting into a venture that they actually know very, very little about as adults. They really don't have too much experience around children. So I think it's really good and it's very, very healthy when people decide to have children, if they've already spent a lot of time around children, that they have a lot of experience around this. And it's kind of like going for a new job. When people go for a job, it's really nice to know that they're going to like their job and also that they have experience with their job. And a lot of employers don't want to hire someone who has no experience at all. So when we're talking about life's most important job of raising children, well, it seems kind of logical that people would want to have some experience, and hopefully a lot of experience, with being around children. So my next question, do you know what working with children entails? I think a lot of people, surprisingly, who have children really don't know. They don't know how much work it is. They don't know how hard it is. They don't know how tough it is to be around a child for hours and hours every day. I think they have a lot of fantasy in it. And I think a lot of people are really let down when their fantasies collapse, when they realize, oh my God, it's a lot of hard work. It's not always fascinating and interesting. Sometimes there's not a lot of fulfillment in it. It can be dirty, it can be frustrating, you can lose a lot of sleep, it can be boring, and also for a lot of people who spend a lot of time with their children, it can be very socially isolating and often not the most intellectually stimulating. And for people who are not into that or don't really fantastically love children in this way, it can be a very frustrating job and not one that they expected. So I think it really helps, again, if people spend a lot of time working with children, spending a lot of time with children, and knowing what they're getting into. And I think a lot of people, if they actually spent a lot of time with children and really spent a lot of concentrated quality time with children before they had kids themselves, they probably wouldn't do it, to be honest. Which leads to the next question, do children like you? Are children spontaneously drawn to you? And I think that's a really good sign for people that they will be good parents, if children naturally and spontaneously like them, because children have very, very good radar to pick up who is real and who is not. And they just get it. They can tell in the tone of people's voice who they are, what their character is. And they're drawn to the healthy people. They're drawn to the people who are open and original and creative and authentic. So if children are naturally drawn to people, a good sign that they'll be pretty good parents. Now, the flip side is there are a lot of people who children are not drawn to them. Children, they don't really like those kind of people all that much. And I think, sadly, oftentimes those people want to have children because they know that their own children really won't have a choice. Their children are going to have to like them. Their children are going to desperately need them. So in a way, they're going to have an automatic built-in audience. So, the next category, your finances. Well, let's face it, having children is expensive. It costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time. There's a lot of stuff that goes into raising them and having all the things that they need for their medical care, for getting around to place, for their clothes, for their toys, for different activities, for any contingencies that might come up. So, the question is, how will you be able to afford this major cost? And I think it's just a very simple question of looking at one's finances and saying, realistically, can I afford to raise my child in an environment that has some padding, a nest that has some nice feathers in it, some things that will really allow my child to have a bit of an easier life? I think it makes it a lot easier for parents when they're not always financially stressed out. And it's amazing how many parents really are stressed out about finances. And when people are really stressed out about finances, it doesn't make them better parents. It makes them worse parents, let's face it. So again, does this mean that I'm prejudiced and think that only rich people should have children? No, because I certainly know a lot of people who have a lot of money who are terrible parents. But at the same time, I certainly think it helps to have above a certain threshold before you have kids. It'll make parenting a lot better, and it'll translate to a much easier life for the child in a lot of ways. Next question, are you in debt? Well, this relates to the last one, because when people are in debt, especially a lot of debt, they're going to be more stressed out. They're going to be putting a lot of their emotional energy into their debt and how to pay it off and how to get out of this really unpleasant situation. So they're not going to be able to give as much emotional energy to their child because they're going to be focused elsewhere. Next question. What is your work history? And what kind of job do you do? Well, I think it certainly helps when parents have a job that doesn't emotionally stress them out, that doesn't keep them away from home for tons and tons and tons of hours a week, because then they have more time to spend with their child. I think ideally when people can really spend a lot of time at home or all their time at home, it's really better. Children certainly do better when they have parents around who can guide them and they can consult with their parents and their parents can see what goes on in their life and really be there for their child. And what's really sad is when you get two parents who both have to work away from home a lot of the time and they're not really able to be parents for their children. Often they have to spend money on having other people watch their children, and often this really isn't fair to a child because it means they're being raised by someone who's not their parent. So again, ideally, people are going to be in a situation where they're going to have a job that allows them a lot of freedom, both in terms of time and in terms of emotion, to be able to be there and raise their children. So, the final category for prospective parents is the community or environment that you live in. The environment in which you're going to raise a child is in many ways going to be decisive in what kind of life your child has, what kind of person your child grows up into, what kind of world your child gets to explore, the healthiness or unhealthiness of that world. So the first question I ask is, will your child have access to nature? Will they have access to go into the natural world and explore it? Not just live in a city, not live in a world of concrete and stone and glass, but a world of trees and natural bodies of water and wild animals and wind and space and freedom for the child to go off into the world and be alone without any sort of human interaction. Next question. Do you live in a safe place? Do you live in a place where your child can grow up without fear of being attacked, without fear of being bullied, without fear of war or violence or abuse or physical abuse, sexual abuse, all sorts of different ways that can harm kids? So is your child going to be able to be raised in a place where they know safety? Because if they know safety, they're going to grow up much, much more secure in who they are as a person. And they're going to be much less likely to grow up into a person who turns around and abuses other people. Next question, will your child have a lot of freedom? Will they be able to live in a world where they can spend their time doing the things they like without being under the watchful eyes of adults, being away from you, being in a place where they can spend time doing what they like without having to ask for permission, where they get a place to explore the dynamics of their environment, of reality, without having to be bothered or intruded upon by other people. When children get a lot of freedom, when they get the freedom to make a lot of their own choices, when they get to make their own voluntary decisions, they grow up into adults who become much more free. Next question. Will your child have access to lots of healthy age mates? Will your child grow up to have the potential to make lots of friends spontaneously, find their own friends, not have to be taken on play dates by you to connect with other adults so that you can meet with those adults' children, but instead have lots of different choices to decide who they want to spend their time with, who they don't want to spend their time with, and lots of people who are healthy so they can have fun and have really healthy emotional friendships. This is one big, big way that children are able to grow up into healthy social beings. Another question, will you be able to stay in the same location for a long time? Will your child be able to grow up in a stable location so they can grow up from their young age into their older childhood in one place, so they can have the same friends, so they can get to know a place really well, so they can have that basic sense of security of their location, which will translate into a basic sense of security in terms of who they are. When parents are moving all the time, it really uproots a child psychologically. It really can be very traumatic. And a lot of parents, sadly, before they have children, they're pretty confident they're not going to be living in the same place. They're probably going to have to move a lot. They have jobs that are going to move them around or might move them around, and this isn't good for a kid. Last question. What kinds of emotional support will you have? Do you have a lot of good friends around you? Do you have a lot of people that will support you on this most difficult job of raising a child? Do you have people who you can lean on? Lots of people who you can talk to, people who know you well, who respect you, who like you, people who you like, who you respect, who you care about, people who you have a lot of give and take with, people with whom you share values. I think it's really important for parents not to be socially isolated, to be the opposite of socially isolated and have lots of support on this very, very difficult job of raising a child.